It's Friday. Hallelujah, right? Y'all made it to the end of another week. And we, the Disability Services Advisory Board, really appreciates y'all being with us today and this week. We hope that you've enjoyed this kind of extended event. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, just kind of a review of what we've heard this week. I believe that Trudy has shared some slides and the presentations from Dr. Griffin's presentations. She mentioned in her presentations, don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I don't think I introduced myself. Thank you for the reminder. I'm Holly Wagoner at Rowan Cabarrus Community College, and I'll be facilitating the panel today, requesting accommodations and technical standards. Reminder here also of our advisory board and an invitation. If you would like to be a part of this advisory board, feel free to reach out to any one of us and share some additional information with you. And we'd love to have your support and networking. And a few other reminders that don't always apply to today, because this is a panel. We will be taking some questions throughout. We have some questions that several of you submitted in advance. Thanks to Trudy for sending out the survey. So we will take some time in the beginning to address the questions that we already have. Feel free to put questions in the chat box at any time. I'll be watching that and to get those answers, or at least open up some discussion about these questions. That you keep your videos off just to facilitate a better connection for everyone. The panel will turn our cameras, we'll keep our cameras on. You guys can do that when I introduce you if you like. And also remember that at the end of today's session, you'll receive an evaluation, and we would just ask that you take some time and fill that out for us. Share your thoughts on the week and any questions or comments that you may have, recommendations for future professional development series. All right. So I would like to ask our panelists. We've got Renee Macemore, who's joining us from Wilkes Community College. If you want to turn your camera on, Renee, and everybody can see you. We've got Monica Isbell from Alamance Community College. I think most people know Monica as the technical standards guru across the state for us. We're happy that she's able to join us and this today.
From Wisconsin.
And Jason Rierson. Is Jason here? I don't think I'm recording. All right, I don't see Jason. Renee and Monica, are you here? You ladies ready?
Yeah, I'm here.
All right. Well, I will get started with the questions that were submitted from the group. And I think probably the best first question to start out with, I'll give to you, Monica. Define technical standards for those of us who are new, or for those of us who maybe we're still working on that process on our campus and it's not something that we're super familiar with.
So technical standards are defined as the non-academic standards, skills, and performance requirements that are essential to participate in an educational program. And those standards can be physical, they can be cognitive, they can be behavioral, and they're demanded of every student. Sometimes people think technical standards are just for students with disabilities. No, every student needs to understand technical standards. I use the analogy with our nurse aid students of, you've got two sides of nurse aid. You've got the book work and the hands-on. How does your instructor know that you've mastered both? How does your instructor know that you've got the skill set, the knowledge from the book work? And they give us a test. I'm like, okay. Then, so how does your instructor know that you've mastered those checkoffs, those skills such as your PPE and how to take it on and put it off, and how to maneuver a patient that's in the bed? How does that instructor know that part of nurse aid? And they usually say we have checkoffs, or they observe, or we have to demonstrate that skill set. So I tell students, I said, you know, would you want a nurse aid and all they had was book work? They're like, nah, I want someone who's got some hands-on and it's actually done it. So technical standards represents both sides. You know, you're bringing into play the skill side of your programs, and not just looking at the academic side, but also the skill side too.
Thank you, Monica. All right, question number 2, for whichever of you wants to jump in. Are technical standards a requirement, or are they helpful in regards to determining reasonable accommodations? Are they required?
I say a combination of both. And I say that too because we are preparing students to go out into the work world, or, you know, leave us and go on. So it would behoove, you know, your institution and your programs to have that information out for all students. A student shouldn't be surprised when they get into a welding program that they're going to have to be able to do a certain task with the torch or whatever. Students should know that, just like we want students to know the academic requirements, what classes they need to take, what grades they need to maintain and make in those courses to progress. Same concept. So I would say required, and not just for students with disabilities, again, for all students. All students need to know from the beginning what's required of me to be successful to complete this program.
You have anything to add on that one, Renee?
I agree. It's kind of both, and I think that for students that do have disabilities, it's helpful to review those technical standards and say, okay, I know I'm going to need a little additional help to complete this technical standard, and then we can look at that and review it, and if we need to make an accommodation so that they can complete that and pass that technical standard for that program. I find it helpful.
So you both kind of alluded to this just a little bit, but we had some questions about when are these kinds of standards made known to prospective students or currently enrolled students? How are students made aware of the technical standards?
So for us at ACC, we have in our curriculum catalog, we have a statement with the programs that have technical standards and where they can find that information. We also, for like our selected admission programs like nursing and dental assisting, all students who are looking at those programs have to go through an info session. So that information is shared there. So we really try to put it on the front end in our catalog, info sessions, all of those pieces that students would access and use.
And for us, every program on their website has them listed as part of the information for the program. And then we have a new advising program that's been in place for a year, and we do an intake process. And during that intake process, depending on their program, our advisors are actually reviewing the technical standards for that program with each student. And it's actually part of their checklist. They have to do it. And then same as Monica, those info sessions for like those health sciences and stuff, they go over those technical standards again, especially if some of them are maybe not technical standards per se that we have chosen, but some of them have state standards as well, and they go over those.
So we had a couple of questions and inquiries about how to work with faculty or program chairs or the academia on campus about outlining steps. How do you approach creating technical standards and discussing technical standards and the importance of them with the academia on your campus?
I can share. I can
Okay.
share. For us, it was a rocky start on who needed to do what. So I worked with my supervisor, my dean, and we focused really on wording, that wordplay to make sure we're all inclusive and we didn't leave anybody out. And we got all the lead instructors and the deans of each department, and we had like a meeting on what they required, what their technical standards would be for per department. And we created a template and we wrote these out. And now we've created, I think we've had a technical standards committee, and we meet at least once a year, or if we need to make some changes, we'll come together as changes are made. And we as a group decide and discuss what those are so that everybody's on the same page and on board. And it's not just like display services is not creating these technical standards, because it's really on the program and what they say those technical standards need to be.
I echo everything Renee has said. Here at ACC, we started as a result of having some problems, encountering some issues. Sometimes that happens that way. And I asked questions. So what are your technical standards for the dental assisting program? And there was a medical assistant too. Where are they at? Oh, they're somewhere in the file cabinet. I said, well, how good is that file cabinet? So it started from us. We had a couple of situations arise on campus that began us looking at technical standards. And so I was kind of the spearhead with providing training. I brought someone else in to do the training. Judith came in and did the training for us and invited other colleagues to come, but trained our faculty and staff on what technical standards are, why we need to have them, how they benefit your programs, those types of things. And then also something that Renee did, looked at who all needed to be at the table, because Monica went writing them. Monica is not in nursing. Monica is not in HVAC. So I need my content experts to be at the table. So we utilized our program faculty, the instructors, department heads, division deans, but we also have here at ACC curriculum advisory councils, and those are individuals within the community who work in those particular fields. So we had a conversation with all of our curriculum advisory councils as those programs were developing standards to get feedback for those who are actually out there in the field, in the industry, working in development. And then we took that to our academic council for review and then for implementation.
Thank you, ladies. So we've got a couple of questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and address those if that's okay. Eric asked, are there interchangeable terms that colleges may use in lieu of technical standards?
Essential functions. Our MLT program one uses the words, I think from their state credential uses the word essential functions. That's the other word I've heard besides technical standards, essential functions.
Yeah, I'll echo that also. The PTA program takes theirs from their accrediting body and says they're called essential functions. But I would add for anyone who's kind of just getting started with this process and still has questions. In 2015, I believe it was, National Head actually gave some guidance, and they defined those two phrases, technical standards and essential functions. And so that can be, I think, a really kind of helpful guide there. And what they describe, like Monica already said, the technical standards are those non-academic admissions criteria, and essential functions as either the core competencies. What is the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities that a student must demonstrate? What do they really need to already kind of come with the ability to perform and to have? So a head does differentiate between those two a little bit. And for me, I can honestly say that's what's made learning, defining, and creating technical standards, helping create technical standards here at RCCC has been a little difficult. But it's a great question, Eric, and I would just encourage anyone to kind of check out that guidance, 2015 from ahead, on the difference or how they define technical standards versus essential functions. And another question, would a fully online program require technical standards?
So Heather, you emailed me this question. I didn't respond because I don't know the answer.
I would think it would depend. Like our early childhood is fully online, except for, of course, some of their work-based learning. And I would think they would still need to follow their technical standards for the seated. It may just look a little different maybe, but I could see where some of that would still be necessary for students to have up front.
Definitely. I think you would still consider what are the overall objectives of the program. And
Yeah.
typically, right, are going to be the same no matter how the course is offered. So, but definitely something to consider.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some more questions here, but if it's okay, I want to jump back to something that I think both of you ladies kind of mentioned and alluded to with regard to a technical standard being something that may be more of the industry or the work related requirement. Because we did have a question come in on, technical standards being solely based on work standards when that's not the primary goal in the educational setting. That's a very, very good point. And you both may have heard this as we've all been in different sessions with Judy and other folks on technical standards. And the one thing that I keep hearing in my mind when I listen to her is that with regard to employment, it's not that you can't include a standard around what that work requirement might be. The important part is that you have it documented, written down in that program's learning outcomes, that program or that at completion of that program, licensure or certification is required. So do you want to expand?
On our technical standards, for some of them that might have those licensures requirements when they're completed, we actually added an extra field in all our technical standards for those programs, and it's called field or industry professional standards. So if when they're done with their program, if they need a CDL or if they need to go get some kind of state licensure, or if there's a background check, especially for our early childhood, they have to have background check even to go to work or their internships. So we add that in there. And it's not that they can't do the program because that's in there, but we want them to be aware that this is something that will come if they go out and get a job.
I echo both the same things that you're saying, ladies. I've always told our faculty that that's fine if the nursing state board says that. You put that in our technical standards, then you're going to have to be able to justify it and explain why that is essential to ACC's nursing program. And you can't just say, well, the state board said they're going to look at why at Alamance Community College nursing program is this standard essential. And so you're going to need to be able to explain that and justify it. Renee, I like your idea of the field of industry standards. I like that.
All right, Erica has in the chat box a good question, and I'm sure this has probably come up in several places. And someone else had submitted something relatable. So when faculty argue that they do not have to make something accessible or use an accessible software or program because of program's technical standards, how do we respond? Example, we don't need alt text because vision is required for blank program.
I think you'd have to look at it because could you, just because it says vision, does that not mean you can accommodate it? We have vision as one of those requirements, like for networking, you got to run certain color wires, but if you can put something on there where they can feel something enough to know what color wire it is at the end. Isn't that accommodating? And therefore they're passing that vision aspect of that technical standard.
And the other thing I would piggyback on, one of our department head for automotive said to me, because we had a student in that program who's blind, said to me, he said, Monica, everyone doesn't come into the automotive field or come in to get a degree in automotive to go work in the field. Some come in because they just want the knowledge. Some come in because they want to work on their cars themselves. Some come in so when they go get their cars fixed, they don't get taken for a ride. It costs. So who's to say that they can't be in the field? So in that particular situation with the student that was blind or is blind, he had some past experience, that student did, working with cars, but we were able to set up a way where we could color code. We could do different things for the wiring. Yeah, I know. With different things with the wiring, where he was able to feel and the wire went here, went there. We even, the faculty had already been thinking about it. You know, Monica, what about kind of an aide or like a lab assistant, someone that could be, he said, and the faculty member said, I don't want to be rude, but could be their eyes. I said, I get what you're saying. You're not being rude. I get what you're saying. And be able to give some verbal directives. And so that's how we did it. This student worked on his own car at home, and wanted to continue to do that, but needed the skill sets and knowledge to be able to do that. So I agree with Renee. Who's to say that we can't find a way to meet that vision requirement? Does that still make that student not meet that standard or not eligible to continue in that program or be in that program?
Thank you. Great points, ladies. So what you just mentioned could lead to something that may address this possible question that we had come in. Is there a possibility that disability services could receive grievances from students if they do not meet technical standards and can no longer continue in a program after paying for the class and being registered? Is there a possibility that disability services could receive grievances from students if they do not meet technical standards?
So my response, that could be a possibility. Yes, that could happen, for lack of better words. We had a situation, I wasn't necessarily a grievance, but we had a student in our machining program that had a traumatic brain injury and did not know how to balance the machine appropriately, just kind of stood there and let it shake violently until the auto system shut it down. And from there, you know, I had done some observations, I've done some other things. We had looked at possible accommodations, but it came to a point where that student was a direct threat situation. And we had to have a conversation about, you know, this is not working and why it's not working. And what we actually did on our end was that we did refund his money for that program and look at other options for him. So the short answer is yes. The institution can be grieved. They could file a grievance against disability services. But what I've always told my faculty has been your documentation. And like Trudy said, putting your technical standards on the website. It should not be a surprise. A student should not get in a program, oh, I got to be, it should not be a surprise. And technical standards, as I've explained to folks, is not to be used as a way to keep people out or a way to deny people access, but it's a way to educate folks and being proactive versus being reactive. You know, just like we're proactive on the end of what courses students need to take, what kind of grades they need to get in those courses, what are the learning objectives of those courses, same concept. So, you know, having those things available on the website, in your printed catalogs, talked about, I like Renee's thing with advising. Yes, talked about and advising for all students, so all students are better equipped and informed. I hope I answered the question. I think I went left.
Well, yeah, I think you did fine. And you actually kind of hit on two other questions that I was going to kind of pull out of that, take a step back on. So who do we connect with? I heard both of you say, you have, especially with your health programs, your colleges offer information sessions and those kinds of things. So I know for me, we do that also, but that was part of that learning process. I think with some of these bigger standards and process and procedure kinds of things, we think, oh, well, we need to go to the program chairs. And for me, that wasn't necessarily the best first place to go. It's the advisors who work directly with our health program students. When you're talking about informing students up front, who are the people that they're meeting with most directly, and more immediately to get that information. And on our campus and maybe many others, it's that health advisor, right? So learn who and ask who is it that I need to connect with on my campus. The other question kind of came about as you were talking, why? Have we addressed that? I may have been looking through my notes to be sure I didn't miss too much, and maybe I did miss it, but the why. And I'm looking really specifically back at some of the guidance and the PowerPoint, the presentation that you've put together and that you've shared with us several times, Monica. But what are those, the main highlighted why behind why we do this?
So are you asking why we do this?
Why technical standards? Why for students and why for our institutions?
Well, as I said before, it's a proactive approach for your student, for your faculty, and for your institution. It helps in identifying if there are student needs, or we may need to look at reasonable accommodations and services. So I see Casey put a message in here, but I'll answer part of that with my statement. So a student can meet technical standards without accommodations. And if there's a need to have an accommodation to be able to meet the technical standard, that can happen too. And then also it's proactive. You want to try to prevent discrimination claims by automatically making assumptions like someone mentioned about, well, we don't need technical standards because vision is required. We need to, step that back a little bit. So I've always said it's been from a proactive perspective, and why not have an informed student population?
Thank you. All right, well, that was pretty awesome. We addressed the questions that came in our pre-survey. But if anyone would like to unmute yourself and ask a question or pose a situation or put a question in the chat box, I will continue to monitor that. It's just 11 o'clock, a couple minutes till. So let's continue our conversation.
Hey, Monica, this is Laura Bracken at Surrey. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Good.
And I hope I'm asking this question correctly. I may be wrong, but I know you had spoke earlier about, about technical standards, and that some programs may already have technical standards or essential standards already in place for their particular program. So the technical standards that you did for that particular program, were they like add-ons or additional things you added, or just enhanced what they already have? I'm trying to understand that part of it, because if they already have something that's state-based, then what did you guys do? Well, additionally,
we reviewed them. Is first thing we did. We reviewed them. So like I said, I gave the example of our medical assisting program. They said, yeah, we got technical standards. I said, where they at? Oh, they somewhere in the file cabinet. I said, well, the file cabinet is not helping us, not helping our students. So regardless of if they have technical standards in place, I did a review. We went back and reviewed all of them to make sure that they were still relevant and prevalent and in line to what the program is and what the program needs are. So I do a review of them and reviewed them together. It was a collective group. It wasn't just me, but reviewing to see if they're still in line or do they need to do some updates. You will find most nursing programs, if no other program, will have some form of technical standards or essential functions they've put out there. A lot of that is already, what they do is they pull it from the state. They pull it from their accrediting organization. And I've said to my folks, you pull it, you got to be able to justify why it's essential for your program here. So let's go back and review it.
Okay.
I hope I
Okay, and
answered your
so
question.
it does. And so the review, so to me, the review is to make sure also that it doesn't do anything that's going to affect the student's accommodation. Or I think you guys had mentioned several times with examples like vision, like, someone making the statement, well, they have to be able to see, or they have to be able to lift so many, so you want to make sure it doesn't, to me, affect the accommodation or deny them any type of accommodation, if that makes sense. And one more question, because I know we all have different programs. Of course, nursing is one of the main ones, but and you looked at the medical assisting, but what about like the programs through workforce training, like BLET? Do you guys look at those programs as well? They're non-curriculum.
I haven't gotten that far yet. But yes, they do need to be looked at. Our EMT program does, but I have not gotten to BLET or our firefighter academy.
Thank you.
I like what you were trying to say, Laura, and it is a really important point. I think maybe that we, as a disability services office, our role in this is support, right? Not like these ladies have said, not to create, because we're not the content experts, but to support and really to look for what you were saying, I think, is inclusive language. So more like distinguish versus see, effective communication versus communicate independently. So language that's not going to discriminate and exclude, so to speak, someone. So a supportive role for a DS officer in the review of technical standards.
This is Trudy. I've had numerous calls and conference and Zoom meetings with people with the BLET program, and they are in the process of coming up with technical standards. I've stressed that, and I know Megan Sherman has also working on this, but they're supposed to come up with some technical standards, and then I told them that I would review them along with the board. But I have had numerous meetings, let's put it that way, and they do recognize the need to have that posted because they are having more and more individuals with disabilities coming into their programs, and they want to better support them. So we are working on that, but at this point, they have not come up with those technical standards. Now they realize that they have standards already developed. They just need to put it in a platform where we can see it and put it on the website for our students to understand what the expectations are.
And Trudy, would that also apply to our EMT programs?
That is covered under that.
Okay.
It's firefighters, EMT, police officers. Yes, it's all under that. So we are working on that. I've been working with the liaison and various other people through that program. But at this point, they have not followed through on those standards that they want listed. But like I said, all through the COVID, I've had numerous conference calls and situations that have come up with that particular division.
And that was the reason that I asked the questions, because I had a situation with a student in the EMT program.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, and you are not the only one.
thank you. I know,
Hey,
sure
this
I'm
is
not.
This is Eric at South Piedmont. Hey, to follow up on what I was saying, I was looking in my website as I was listening to everything, and I'm honestly, I found a few programs that have their technical standards listed as such on the website, but there's quite a few that don't. And I was wondering, is there any kind of, and maybe I missed this, if it's obvious, I'm sorry. Is there any kind of like legislation driving this, and any kind of required timeline that, remember how we started to hear the 5-year plan for getting everybody accessible, and there was that drive. Is there anything similar in terms of getting technical standards up? Or is this more of just a general awareness that we need to do this?
I'll say a little bit, and I'll let Monica, the real expert, follow up. One piece of information that I've kind of just referred to in the past, Eric, it's very specific to the National Deaf Center, but they have an equitable access guide on understanding the legal responsibilities of institutions, and they have a section that is specific to technical standards. And it outlines a handful of different cases that did go. Argini is a name that most might be familiar with. Now, most of these are health programs, medical related programs. So just kind of give some guidance on, from case law perspective, that should discriminatory language be in place on students with disabilities, or nothing be in place, and then students are either dismissed from a program or just not accommodated. That is a kind of a document that gives some cases, the case law as to why and what the Office of Civil Rights said. Here's what you should put in place. But is there a specific legislation? No, not that I'm aware of.
Okay, and the reason I asked that, I'm glad that you were able to say that, because it seems, and again, this is probably obvious, that it's just kind of becoming a reality to me that if there is no legislation, that's usually the muscle that pushes people to do what they got to do. And
You're right.
so so it's a matter of learning to address it with finesse within your own institution, I guess, and begin to push it a little more.
Yeah, I think, and we can talk a little bit more about this, because someone asked in the chat, how do you get this process started on your campus? And I think we have to really come at this and have a fairly good understanding, or at least be able to explain the benefit for all, the benefit for our students, the benefit for our faculty, because they're going to be in the classroom in the program, and then the benefit for the institution at large. And try to, it'd be nice if there was a law, like you said, because that's what makes people do things, but I'm not aware that there is. So looking at it from that perspective, like Monica and Renee have mentioned already, being very proactive in supporting of the student, but also supportive of the institution and the program, and sharing the benefit of what technical standards can be for all of those, and getting that conversation started. And in your you have those legal cases.
Are there any is there any lobbying stuff going on in Washington to try to legislate this at all, or that we're aware of?
I can't say that I'm aware of that.
Okay, I might research that a little bit and see if there is anything, and if there's not, then we're back to kind of, got to do it for ourselves. But if there is anything like that, that could be something that, people could jump on board with us and support and back. But it doesn't sound like there are, but I'll look into it and see if there is anything.
So Casey's asked a follow-up question. Given that accommodations can be given for students to meet technical standards, is it clearly stated that accommodations can be requested? Is it made clear to the student that yes, these are the technical standards, but you can request reasonable accommodations in order to meet these? I'm just thinking from the perspective of a student who may want to sign up, but not sure they should even apply because they don't meet the standards.
We actually have a display services statement at the bottom of every single technical standards form online. Every single location they're listed, there is a display services statement.
Same thing here on our technical standards. There is a statement for disability services. Yes.
Same with us as well. And that kind of that disclaimer statement that standards are to be met with or without reasonable accommodations, contact.
We try to encourage the student to contact us early, as we do with all students, contact us early because it may take a little bit of time, and we want to make sure that we're able to meet the need.
This is Trudy. I have a question for you all. And this is one of the reasons why we wanted this topic in the first place. A person from Department of Public Instruction contacted me several months ago regarding the denial of accommodations, particularly extended time. And DPI was in total support of our decision. They were not in disagreement. And they thought that, you know, instead of providing extended time, the student needed to learn more time management. And, you know, there are certain areas or certain careers that, you know, particularly in a clinical field, you shouldn't have extended time, particularly if it's doing CPR, for example, or, you know, in veterinary science, you know, saving an animal's life. It's a time sensitive issue, and they were certainly in agreement with us and the disability service person, but the liaison at the early college was having a problem with this because we were not recognizing their accommodations under their IEP, which, you know, of course, we don't need to go into that. I already discussed that with them. But maybe you could discuss some of the accommodations that, you know, have been difficult or are not okay to provide because of a certain technical standard. And I know that's a convoluted question. It's difficult, but maybe some situations that you may have had where you're like, no, we can't do this because of the standard.
I think what comes to my mind has been like in cases of emergencies, like I'll just use nursing. If someone's going into a cardiac arrest, you're going to have to know what to do and be able to do it. And extended time is not appropriate for that standard when we're looking at, if you're looking at a standard when we're looking at cognitive and being able to work in a fast-paced environment where you got to make decisions quickly. So something like having extended time on those types of procedures, those procedures that are life and death, that's not appropriate. It may be appropriate to have extended time when you're taking your test, you know, your book work test, but not in that skill set. I think about the OCR case that was shared with us about the vet tech situation with that student, where they're talking about emergent clinical skills versus non-emergent. And I kind of put that in the same kind of line of like things that are emergency related types, things that are life or death situations. We had a situation within nurse aid where we had a student out on site, and the patient has to wear a gait belt because prone to falling, and the patient didn't want to. Patient, I'm good. The student did not follow the directive, and the patient ended up actually falling. And so we had to deal with that situation. But those types of things where you've got to make quick decisions, or decisions where it could be not necessarily an immediate injury or accident, but can have a repercussion later on down the road. I don't know if I answered that.
We had an accommodation one time, and it was for a clinical setting, but it was not for one of those skills or tasks, things that, you know, absolutely require that it be done within a certain amount of time for safety or health reasons. But it was a student with a reading disability, and had requested additional time for her notes and to fill in like the template forms that the nursing program requires students to fill in your progress report and your notes, you know, using this particular form. And that requires having access to the patient record, right? Well, patient records are only accessible on the site, and the student was finding that, well, they were failing, they weren't getting good grades because she didn't have enough time in the clinical setting to really read the information, process the information, and fill in that template that she needed to. So it was just really, you know, a conversation about the why and what was happening. And we were able to negotiate an additional space at the clinical site for the student to have more time to be able to do that. Of course, it was up to the student to manage her time a little better and coordinate, you know, priorities to be able to use that space outside of when she was expected to be like on the clinical floor. But it ended up working out. Kind of an example of a clinical site accommodation for a non-emergent skill, I guess.
I had one recently, a nursing student in clinical. Luckily it was a temporary situation, but she had injured her shoulder and was unable to lift the required lift amount in her clinical site. So of course she asked for an accommodation, and that was a whole can of worms kind of. So I ended up having a conversation with the director of nursing, and we also thought the best way was also to bring in the HR department at the clinical and kind of discuss how they would do an actual person nurse that worked there. What kind of accommodations would they do? Is there something that we could have done that would be similar that can work? But luckily it was temporary. And the other thing was she could make up her clinical hours after she was released from her doctor, kind of work around it as long as it was inside the same semester. It kind of just worked itself out because luckily she only had about a week or 2 weeks time frame she couldn't lift. So, but I thought it would be helpful just to bring in like that HR person and figure out what they would do with others, and if there was some way that we could kind of do something similar.
Great idea. We had in our OTA program a student who was not able to transfer a patient from chair to bed or bed to chair on their own based on a chronic physical medical condition. But in really going back and talking with the program chairs, the staff at the site, what they determined was that ultimately a safe transfer is what's most important of the patient, not necessarily that the student have to transfer the patient independently or on their own. So the accommodation was to allow either another student or a staff member to help the patient transfer. And that still enabled the student to demonstrate their skill in that move. And V. Graham, I'm sorry, I don't know the first name, but makes a really good point, keeping in mind that accommodations shouldn't cause undue hardship, and they do need to be reasonable. So that's a good point. And I think also everything that we have all heard about that is that this is a collaboration among the college's staff, the college student, because these are college programs and college objectives. So going back to, Trudy talking about with DPI and CCP, it's not their program. So it's, having the right people included in the conversations to be sure that we're, asking what questions need to be asked, because it's about ensuring access, not success, and ensuring that we're not altering the objectives of our college's programs.
I have a question along that line about reasonable accommodations. Hi, ladies, you're doing a great job. The question I have is, when is it, if ever, appropriate to request on-time testing, totally untimed? I know we're trying to work in our college towards being more equitable, and that is something that we're looking into. However, I know this, and it's not for anything like a nursing class or anything. This is more of a gen ed type setting for a class. But I want to get a reference point for something of that sort.
Either of you want to provide before I give my very brief answer? Kathy, what we send on an accommodation notification, especially for tests that are primarily for a written format, is here's what the student's been approved for, whether that's time and a half, double time. And I usually include in a statement that says anything more is your discretion. Just please inform the student of the time that they're allowed, and leave that in the court of the faculty member.
Okay, so if they have a doctor's note that says that we still can, because I was saying that our limit is double time.
So,
I don't ever say that I will put a limit.
So Kathy, I've had a situation where I've got a student who has a medical condition where with writing, it's very laborious and it's very big and it's very time consuming. And so he was in a math class. And so in conversation with that instructor, I talked to the instructor about looking at unlimited time for testing because of the amount of time it takes him to, how long it takes him to write, and how long one question can take him 20 minutes to write down. So can we look at an untimed test? Would that modify the essential functions of the test?
Mm-hmm.
What are your essential functions of the test? And then the other piece, I had that conversation with the instructor of breaking up that test over multiple sessions, where the student, I think the instructor gives a total of 10 questions. He gets 5 questions one day, and then he gets 5 questions the next day. Is that problematic? So I agree with Holly and with you saying that don't limit yourself to this double time, because there could be a situation where an unlimited test time is reasonable and appropriate.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes sense. This student has a medical condition that one of the underlying side effects is that it affects processing or causes some confusion, and coupled with already having a diagnosis that speaks to being very anxious anyway. So that was the need for the double time in the first place, and then now untimed. Thank you.
I just have a comment. I think it really, again, we need to remember that our technical standards, and Monica and Renee and Holly have said this eloquently, but you know, it really is individualized. The technical standards are based on the colleges, the specific programs. So that's really important to think about in advertising and making sure that the students know exactly what the expectations are, because usually these are for certification in a required field, and they should be fairly similar across the board, particularly like in nursing or welding or something like that. A student's accommodations are individually based, but they still have to be determined by the instructor of that program, and in collaboration with disability services and the student to find out what best meets the needs of that student. But again, if they can't meet those technical standards, then we need to then think about advising them in alternative aspects of a program of their interest. So there's many other avenues that they can think about if they can't function or perform in that specific area. So I think that's really important to consider, is our advisement and our collaboration with our disability services and our instructors, because our disability service people, like Monica said, do not determine, you know, what is required of each program. The instructors should, but we need to then determine and work in collaboration on what is a reasonable accommodation on that, and to best meet the needs.
Heather popped in the chat box and just asked a couple of questions that I think that first one, what's the barrier, is a really good reminder for all of us. Sometimes I know myself, I get overwhelmed with either a request or the amount of documentation that may come in from one student, and you just start thinking, okay, you know, what should I do? What's the answer? And it's sometimes hard to remember to take a step back. So that would be a piece of advice that I would share with veterans and newbies alike. Take the step back and ask, you know, what is the barrier? What is it that even possibly needs a solution here? And then as you have heard throughout our conversation today, it's case by case. There's usually hardly ever an immediate no or an immediate yes. It's case by case. Review what you've got, you know, ask the right question, and just remember that I think we've got a pretty great network of folks here in this call and others who aren't able to join us today across the state. So keep up the network and the communication, and use us as needed. So we are at 11:29. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Monica, for your time today. For everyone else joining us, we hope that you've gained some beneficial information, I'm sure, because these ladies have shared lots of things with me in the past. I'm sure they're probably open to sharing with the rest of you. So I'm giving you free reign to email Monica and email Renee and email anybody and ask, because they may just share.
Email Holly. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So again, thank you all for being with us. We hope you've enjoyed this week, and look forward to the survey coming out, and we look forward to your feedback. Everybody have a great weekend.
Thank you, guys.